Hi, everyone, and welcome to the PR Office's podcast, PRO Talks. I'm Gabriel Hedengren, an account director at the PR Office, and today we're going to talk about party conference season, which is almost upon us. I can't believe it's been a year since we last went to the Tory and Labour Party conferences, but saying that, there's been a lot of change since a year ago. We've had two prime ministers, we've had significant changes in cabinet and senior civil service, but also in the shadow cabinet on the Labour side. Whereas last year we were in a situation of political flux and uncertainty, we're now in a situation where the opposition has a consistent 15 to 20 point lead over the Tory government. So it's a very different and interesting dynamic, and everyone's expecting general elections to come up towards the end of last year. So things are really now starting to be planned with that in mind. And with me to discuss both the Tory conference and Labour conference, both of which will be attended by the PR Office, is Nick Connor. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Gabe. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. So you will be at the Tory Party conference on behalf of our whole team. So I thought we'd kick off by talking about your expectations. For that, it's obviously Rishi Sunak's first conference as party leader. And while he'll have one more chance to rally the troops, so to speak, ahead of the expected time for the next round of elections, it's the last conference ahead of mayor elections next year, particularly in London. The Tories will be focusing on how they can unseat Sadiq Khan. There are also Scottish elections coming up, and obviously still a focus on national politics as well. It would be good to first hear from you, Nick, on what topics or policy areas do you think will be used to unite the party or excite conference this year?
Yeah, no, it's going to be a fascinating conference season. Interesting fact, I think it's the first time in living memory, or at least my living memory, where the Conservative Party are not going last. They're not going to be the closing act of the conference season. So the Conservative Party this year is in the middle. And I'm really looking forward to this. As many people know, I've been going to Conservative Party conference for many years. 2008 was my first official one, but a small sort of note. I actually rocked up to the party conference in 2007 in Blackpool, the last time it was in a seaside town. But I was a bit naive and I didn't realise you needed a security pass and I wasn't allowed in. But 2008 was my first conference. And actually, if you look at the parallels between 2008 and now, it is actually fascinating. So 2008, there was this fella called Boris Johnson. He's just been, he was just elected mayor of London, and he gave a bombastic speech, and everyone went, "Oh, actually, this guy's quite good. Maybe he could be a prime minister one day." The party was gearing up for the 2010 general election. It was professionalising. You had the so-called Cameroons running the party, but a lot of the Conservative Party felt left behind. Now, fast forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 prime ministers in the last Tory term over the last couple of years, we're in a very similar situation where we have Rishi Sunak, the prime minister, leading a party on policies which they're not so sure about. So there's certain things, let's say his financial plan, where lots of the Conservative Party would be what they would call, the words are going for growth, which is basically spending more, put incentives, tax cuts into the economy, where Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt's plans are very much sort of fiscal stability and bringing down inflation. So there is a bit of tension there between membership and the professional party. Quite interesting, last year, my big takeaway from last year's conference with Liz Truss was the membership loved Liz Truss, but the professional party, what I mean by that, the MPs, the lords, the staffers, those people who work in politics, felt that her economic plan was a bit of a disaster. Flash forward to this year, it's almost the opposite. So Rishi Sunak has a bit of a balancing act at this conference. I don't think we're going to see much new policy, but he needs to give enough red meat for his party to get behind and rally behind them, but also still seem competent in the eyes of the country when it comes to things like the economy. So I think we could see some interesting attacks on Sadiq Khan, obviously last conference for mayor elections. There'll be lots of talk on war on motorists and things like that, which one is quite good with the electorate, but also membership will quite like some of those messages.
Yes, as you say, I think quite clearly going after Sadiq Khan is something most or all Tories can get behind, so you can definitely envision that being a big focus. I wanted to pick you up on the point around motorists and net zero or climate policy, because that's something that a lot of our clients follow very closely, tied to obviously the whole Sadiq Khan attack line on ULEZ in London. Is about this sense among the Tory grassroots that climate change policies, decarbonisation is too fast and anti-motorists, and they want to create a dividing line where Tories seem to be the party for people who love cars and the Labour Party being the party for people who don't. So how do you see the leadership managing that? Because that's, to me at least, is one of the areas where it's sort of a thin line for them to thread.
Yeah, no, interesting question. I don't think we're going to see any policy. I don't think we're going to see the Conservative Party come out and say what they will do. I see the so-called war on motorists will be twofold. Obviously, you've got Sadiq Khan in London with ULEZ. Equally this week in Wales, where I'm from and live, you've seen a general speed limit decrease from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour, which has basically irritated everyone. ULEZ, 20 miles an hour are things which irritate voters. So I think this is a nice opt-out for the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak, where he's able to, one, attack Labour, because it's very hard being in power for, sort of a decade and a half almost, to attack Labour Party on anything. But he has two examples. He has Sadiq Khan's record in London and the Welsh Labour's government in Wales. And he can use that as his red meat to attack the Labour Party. Now, I don't think we're going to see any movements, sort of net zero targets as statute. I think, we're a year out from an election. That's going to create a hell of a row. How many people in the Conservative Party, MPs, will actually support it versus sort of quite a noisy sort of group of backbenchers. So I don't see him actually doing any fiscal policy, but I can see it being the rhythmic of this conference. Now, it's quite interesting. When I said I don't think we're going to see much policy, I really mean we're not going to see much policy. But there is so much there to go. And, this is my message really to businesses is, even you are going down to Ladbrokes and putting £1,000 in Labour within the next general election, you still need to be engaging with the Conservative Party, because they're going to be in power for another year. And there's so much outstanding policy, which hopefully we may hear a bit of clarity. I don't think we will, but things like the online safety bill, the strategies in tech, such as the quantum strategy, semiconductor strategy. They've got a big summit on AI, and we're going to have a whole regulatory framework. So in this next year, there's an awful lot the government's going to be doing, which are going to be affecting businesses. We've got a budget coming up. Where does the party stand on things like business rates? We won't get to answer at Conservative Party conference, but I think it's really important for businesses to engage. Now, one thing that's really interested me about business engagement at Conservative Party conference is we've seen attendance by businesses drop. Now, it's a simple monetary reason that a lot of businesses are seeing the Labour Party as the place to go to lobby for future. So as less business people at Conservative Party conference, which people would say, Conservative Party is the natural home. It'd be interesting seeing what Labour Party conference is like, with more suits in the room, less greasy hair, much more slick back gelled hair at Labour Party conference.
I was there last year, and you could already very much tell that this shift was happening. There was a lot of businesses, energy companies, professional services representatives, especially on sort of the conference open floor section. Obviously, lots of suits. You could hear some people sort of moan about that or noting that difference. And from people I know who've been engaged in the party sort of going back many years, the shift is quite radical. Because obviously you think back just 4 or 5 years ago, it's a completely different leadership of the party. So I definitely think that will just be ramped up this year, because it's even more seen as, Labour is most likely going to be the next party of government. So you need to build those relationships now and not be seen as, coming to them too late. I do think one interesting point, though, just to pick up on business engagement in general, and why, you should really focus on both parties, is that how the Labour Party seems to be approaching a lot of these strategies, whether it's, the tech sector, helping out the financial sector in the UK, is that they very much want to be seen as respectable and not rocking the boat, so that people who, for a long time, as you mentioned, will have seen the Tories as the natural party of business, sort of trust them to take that on. So a lot of the things that the Tories will be doing in the next year, I deem very unlikely that Labour will sort of attack much or change a lot, unless there's something that proves very unpopular with businesses themselves. So there is still a lot of influence there, I think, for the current government leading up to that, because Labour is not going to be in the business of attacking business now. They're going to find other ways of attacking the Tory party. So I think that's something to look out for and to consider. Like, it's what I found last year is that it was all quite chummy and positive, and I was at the Bloomberg business drinks, and it was just all very celebratory, and Rachel Reeves, the shadow chancellor, turned up to all the sort of big business events to make sure she was seen in a positive light there. And a lot of the more contentious things were around, some of the climate things and more sort of niche areas. And I guess with that in mind, as you say, there are some other parallels with Labour and Tory party as well, because the Labour Party is in a similar position, right, where the leadership now since 2020 is very much going towards the centre, and then having to deal with a more radical section of the party and the Labour movement more broadly, pulling them towards the extreme. Which I guess is sort of a mirror image of where we were in 2019, where it was the other way around for both parties.
That's fascinating, actually, because if you look at it from the Conservative point of view, and we look at one issue, let's say climate change, where you've got the membership who wants the Conservative Party to be, less environmentally friendly, so get rid of net zero. And in a certain sense, that Rishi Sunak's in the centre, and he has to give a nod to that. But it's almost a flip with Keir Starmer, where he's in the centre, but yet his party wants to pull to the left. And there's one very contentious issue, thinking very much for Scotland, and yourself being a man of the Nordics, North Sea oil being, sort of a very potent issue at the Labour Party conference. So how do you think Rishi Sunak is going to be able to maintain his sort of stronghold in the centre, but either carry support or even fight the left on certain issues which business wants, the membership may not want?
I think that it's going to be very much determined by how much both parties sort of manage to rein their extremes in. So I don't think Keir Starmer or the top leadership will give much away or give Rishi Sunak many chances to catch them out on this. They seem so far very ruthless and very much able to sort of adapt their messaging to whatever's needed. In the moment. The things that could hurt them are things like, disruptive protests, Labour Party members going out on a whim saying things, and that being used by the Tories across social media, for example, to campaign against them. So I think a lot of it's going to depend on how much the Labour Party leadership can keep that under control. So like something that could be very bad press for Labour, for example, is if someone manages to disrupt Keir Starmer's speech by saying something. So I think that's going to be sort of the thing that's interesting to watch. And I guess it's the same for Rishi Sunak. Like, he needs to make sure that, whatever Liz Truss comes out to say, or the more sort of radical people on its ear come out to say, like, how do you ensure that that's relatively moderate and not too aggressive? So yeah, I think that's what we should look out for. I think the leadership of both the Labour and the Tory party are both doing their best to stay in the middle. And it's a tricky for Rishi Sunak, as you say, because he's in power. There'll be demand on him to do as much as possible in the last year. Whereas, there is pressure on Labour to also be more specific, but they're still in opposition. So they can still sort of delay saying anything until next year and not give the Tories much time to respond. So yeah, I think that's my take on it. So I think you're right. Rather than specific policies, this year is really going to be about message control and party control and coming out of it looking positive.
No, absolutely. And, if my big takeaway, if the Conservative Party can hold on for a leader for another year, that's probably a big win for them. And, sort of finally, what in a year's time, what do you think are the benchmark from this conference? What do you think as a potential party of power? What do you think is the benchmark looking back in a year's time? Labour Party want to take away from this conference?
I mean, I think it's going to remain being seen as responsible, serious, disciplined, and not backtracking on Keir Starmer's current strategy of sort of always pulling towards the middle and meeting the Tories on policy. I think if in a year's time you look back on a year of backtracking, infighting, underperformance in some of the upcoming elections, I think that's what he's going to be evaluated on, really, because in the end, what he stated as his main priority is just getting into power. So I think if he can continue showing that he maintains that lead and that discipline, I think that's going to be what matters most, because I think there is really a sense of people wanting change, but competent change. So he just needs to keep that up. And in the last year, he's very much relied on the Tories being a mess. So now he needs to prove that he can maintain control of the party sort of sustainably. So I think that's more what's going to matter than specific policy areas, because to be honest, they're not being very specific about that anyway at the moment. So on this note, thank you so much, Nick, for coming on the podcast. A reminder to all listeners that PRO will be at both conferences. We're there to obviously gather intelligence and be nerdy on either side about what's going on, but also representing our clients, gathering intelligence for them and making sure that any requests or worries they have are raised with the right stakeholders in either party, whether that's, MPs, cabinet, shadow cabinet, or civil servants, local government officials. So if there is anything you want to engage the parties on, please do get in touch with us. We're still very much open. We're still looking at the schedules and getting our agendas in place. So do make sure that you let us know how we can help you. And on that note, thank you for listening and see you soon.